The next viable option for Windows, and especially if you have an adversary to Microsoft and are concerned about BitLocker implementation issues, is VeraCrypt. This is possibly the most viable fork of TrueCrypt. And TrueCrypt, if you're not aware, was the leading free open source disk encryption tool pre-Windows 8. But for unclear reasons, the developers abandoned the project. VeraCrypt and CipherShed were two resulting forks of this project being abandoned. First, the good points about VeraCrypt. Ciphers offered are those that you can see here. We've got AES, we've got Serpent, we've got Twofish, and these are 256-bit keys and XTS mode of operation, which is what you want. It also offers cascades, which you can see here, or chaining of ciphers together, for example, AES, Twofish, Serpent. This can potentially future-proof you against practical methods of attack against a single algorithm, but these will be slower. You can click here and test your system to see how fast it is with each of the algorithms. Then you can make a choice based on that. AES is likely to be the fastest and is recommended for most situations. But if you don't need speed, say you're creating a container that you may not access very often, then you could opt for a cascade. And if we were to compare this to BitLocker, BitLocker doesn't offer cascades. Let's talk about implementation vulnerabilities. TrueCrypt, which VeraCrypt is based on, has been security audited at least a couple of times that I'm aware of and that is publicly known. One you can see the results of here, and there was also another one done by the German government. Some security issues were found with TrueCrypt, but nothing that could decrypt the drive, nothing earth-shattering. And these have been fixed now in VeraCrypt. They are not fixed in TrueCrypt. The Google Project Zero has also found a couple of issues: local elevation of privilege on Windows by abusing drive letter handling and by incorrect impersonation of token handling. The token handling issue here. There was also a DLL hijacking issue affecting TrueCrypt and VeraCrypt installer that allowed code execution with elevation of privilege. Again, this has been fixed by VeraCrypt, but these and any future issues, any future bugs, will never be fixed in the original TrueCrypt. But with all that said, we have a level of confidence in VeraCrypt and in some ways TrueCrypt in its implementation that so far no security professional or hacker has been able to decrypt the disks, even with professional attempts. And based on the audits and the reviews, as the source code is open, we are pretty confident that there are no deliberate backdoors or weakened ciphers for TrueCrypt and VeraCrypt in where it maintains the same code. One major advantage of VeraCrypt over BitLocker is it offers container encryption via a file and also volume or partition encryption. So instead, or as well as whole disk encryption, you can use an encrypted container for other files as well. It also supports hidden containers, entire hidden operating systems, and if you use encrypted partitions, they leave no encryption signature for plausible deniability. File containers can be moved to different operating systems too. As a container encryption solution, I recommend VeraCrypt for Windows, Mac, and Linux. That's as a container solution. So as it says here, you can encrypt a non-system partition or drive, and you can encrypt the system partition or the entire system drive. In Windows, it has pre-boot authentication for whole disk encryption, and for all supported operating systems, it has multi-factor authentication options, including key files, where you can use something like an MP3 file as a second factor of authentication. Also security or cryptographic tokens and smart cards that are accessed using the PKCS number 11, 2.0 or later protocol. So for example, you could use a Nitro key, any of these, and also the Ubico keys also support PKCS number 11. This is an example BIOS screen here to the left, and here is an example UEFI screen to the right. The basic input-output system BIOS firmware interface is actually being phased out now and replaced with the Unified Extendable Firmware Interface, UEFI, which is a more functional replacement with better features and support for 2 terabyte drives plus. All Windows machines now have to support UEFI, and one of the security features of UEFI is called Secure Boot. Secure Boot protects against adversaries that try to tamper with the boot process in order to inject malicious payloads into the operating system, such as with the Evil Maid attack or Knowledgeable Evil Maid attack. When Secure Boot is enabled, the core components used to boot the machine must have correct cryptographic signatures, and UEFI firmware verifies this before it lets the machine start. If any files have been tampered with, such as a bootloader, it will break the signature and the system won't start. Without UEFI Secure Boot, adversaries can take advantage of several pre-boot attack points, including the system-embedded firmware itself, as well as the interval between the firmware initiation and the loading of the operating system. Malware inserted at this point has full control of the device and can report the secret key if entered. UEFI Secure Boot does not require a trusted platform module, as is the common misconception. If you want to know more about UEFI Secure Boot, I suggest you read this document here. So I'll say that again, UEFI Secure Boot does not require a trusted platform module. VeraCrypt is also fast, free, open source as I've said. There's a portable version too, which is brilliant, and it's pretty easy to use. And it's also under active development. Now for some of the negatives. The newly added code that creates VeraCrypt and separates it from TrueCrypt has been shown to be a little buggy, but maybe that's to be expected. But if you're relying on it to store all your data, it is a little worrying. Maybe this will get better, maybe this will get worse. Hard to predict. Configuration-wise, VeraCrypt doesn't stop you from doing things that are silly, like using hibernate and sleep functions while the encrypted disk is open and the secret key is in memory. This will leave your secret key on the disk. Other products do protect you from that, which is a useful feature for some people. VeraCrypt is weaker against physical attacks than BitLocker. In fact, they have a design choice to not protect against tampering. VeraCrypt's own documentation states that VeraCrypt is unable to secure data on a computer if an attacker physically accesses it, and VeraCrypt is then used on the compromised computer by the user again. This is a very difficult attack to defend against, which is why VeraCrypt have adopted that approach, but I will cover some mitigations to that later. The VeraCrypt developers have no plans to use the Trusted Platform module, and here is their explanation. The question posed is, some encryption programs use TPM to prevent attacks. Will VeraCrypt use it too? Answer, no. These programs use TPM to protect against attacks that require the attacker to have administrative privileges or physical access to the computer, and the attacker needs you to use the computer after such access. However, if any of these conditions are met, it is actually impossible to secure the computer, and therefore you must stop using it instead of relying on TPM. They continue, if the attacker has administrator privilege, he can, for example, reset the TPM, capture the content of the RAM containing the master keys, or content of files stored on mounted VeraCrypt volumes, decrypted on the fly, which can then be sent to the attacker over the internet or saved on an unencrypted local drive from which the attacker might be able to read it later when he gains physical access to the computer. They also say if the attacker can physically access the computer hardware and you use it after such an access, he can, for example, attach a malicious component to it, such as a hardware keylogger that can capture the password, the content of the RAM containing master keys, or content of files stored on mounted VeraCrypt volumes decrypted on the fly, which can then be sent to the attacker, again over the internet, or saved to an unencrypted local drive from which the attacker might be able to read it later when he gains physical access to the computer again. They continue, the only thing that TPM is almost guaranteed to provide is a false sense of security. Even the name itself, Trusted Platform Module, is misleading and creates a false sense of security. As for real security, TPM is actually redundant, and implementing redundant features is usually a way to create so-called bloatware. End of their quote. They're taking quite a hardline view on the TPM. For me, the TPM adds another layer of defense, but it's true if a well-resourced adversary can physically access the computer hardware and you use it after such access, it is game over. Also, if an attacker gains administrative privileges, the TPM can potentially be manipulated. And the final issue I see with VeraCrypt is its future and its potential for development. Because VeraCrypt and its forks aren't true free and open source software due to the original TrueCrypt license, this puts off developers from the open source community, which is a real shame because it could fly if the open source community took a hold of it. So because of that license issue, you do have an unknown there. For me, VeraCrypt is a viable whole disk encryption alternative to TrueCrypt with the bugs that have been found in it fixed. It betters BitLocker in being open source, supporting containers and hidden containers, hidden operating systems, cascading algorithms, and just has much more functionality and features than BitLocker. But as I said, if you only really care about your laptop being stolen or lost and the files being accessed, then BitLocker may be a better option. Also, it has suffered from bugs and niggles, which doesn't give you confidence when it holds all your precious files.